A whisper of suspicion can be a dangerous thing, but for a woman 7 months pregnant, it can be a tidal wave. For Elara, it wasn't a whisper. It was a scream, a silent, soul-shattering shriek that echoed in the lavish ballroom. She saw it across the room, nestled in the décolletage of a rising starlet shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. Her necklace. Not a similar one, not a copy, but hers. The one-of-a-kind, custom-made sapphire and diamond masterpiece her husband had gifted her for their anniversary. The room began to spin. The polite chatter faded into a dull roar, and in that moment Elara's perfect world, with its loving husband and eagerly awaited first child, began to crumble. She knew then that to uncover the truth, she would have to invite a silent, unblinking eye into her home, a hidden camera that would reveal a betrayal more twisted and diabolical than she could ever have fathomed. The city of Avalonia sparkled beneath their penthouse apartment, a glittering tapestry of dreams and ambition. From their perch in the clouds, Elara and Julian Croft seemed to have it all. Theirs was a love story whispered with envy in the city's most exclusive circles. Elara, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her sharp intellect and warm heart, was a celebrated art historian. Julian, with his movie star looks and a charm that could disarm the most hardened cynic, was a titan of the financial world, a man who turned everything he touched to gold. Their life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Days were filled with laughter, whispered sweet nothings, and the shared anticipation of their first child. Elara was 7 months pregnant, her body a beautiful vessel for the new life they had created. She had stepped back from her demanding career, choosing to nest to prepare for the arrival of their son, a decision Julian had wholeheartedly supported. He had been a doting husband, catering to her every craving, massaging her swollen feet, and speaking to her burgeoning belly in hushed, loving tones. For their 5th wedding anniversary, just 2 months prior, Julian had outdone himself. He had commissioned a necklace from the legendary Parisian jeweler Maison Dubois. It was a breathtaking piece, a cascade of deep blue sapphires reminiscent of a midnight sky interspersed with brilliant cut diamonds that sparkled like constellations. At its center hung a magnificent pear-shaped sapphire, a stone as deep and mysterious as the ocean. It was, Julian had declared, a symbol of their love, unique, timeless, and infinitely precious. He had fastened it around her neck, his eyes reflecting the sparkle of the gems, and whispered, "For my one and only." Elara had worn it only once, on the night of their anniversary dinner. Since then it had resided in its velvet-lined box tucked away in their state-of-the-art safe, a treasured keepsake she was too afraid to wear for fear of losing it. Tonight was the annual Starlight Gala, a glittering charity event that drew the city's elite. Elara, radiant in a bespoke emerald green gown that elegantly draped over her baby bump, felt a surge of contentment. Julian was by her side, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. He was the perfect picture of a proud husband and father-to-be. The ballroom was a sea of haute couture and expensive champagne. Elara, sipping on sparkling water, exchanged pleasantries with familiar faces, her smile genuine, her heart full. It was during a lull in the conversation that her eyes drifted across the room, and then she saw it. A young woman impossibly beautiful, with cascading raven hair and a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, was holding court in the center of a captivated circle of admirers. She was an actress, Elara vaguely recalled, a rising starlet named Seraphina Monroe, but it wasn't her fame or beauty that made Elara's breath catch in her throat. It was what lay nestled against her porcelain skin. The necklace, the cascade of sapphires, the brilliant cut diamonds, the magnificent pear-shaped sapphire at its center. It was her necklace. Elara's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, and a cold dread, sharp and piercing, settled in the pit of her stomach. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Her necklace was locked away in their safe. Julian had assured her it was a one-of-a-kind creation. Her hand flew to her own neck, her fingers finding only her bare skin. A wave of nausea washed over her. She turned to Julian, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning panic. "Julian!" she whispered, her voice trembling. He followed her gaze, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before it was firmly back in place. "What is it, my love?" "The necklace," she breathed, "the one that woman is wearing. It's mine." Julian's eyes flickered towards Seraphina, a flicker so quick Elara might have missed it if she hadn't been staring so intently. He let out a soft chuckle, a sound that was meant to be reassuring, but grated on Elara's raw nerves. "Darling," he said, his voice a smooth, placating balm. "Don't be silly. Your necklace is safe at home. That's just a similar design. Maison Dubois is a popular jeweler after all." "No," Elara insisted, her voice gaining a frantic edge. "It's identical. The setting, the size of the stones. Everything." "You're seeing things, my love," he murmured, his hand now rubbing soothing circles on her back. "It's the pregnancy. Your mind is playing tricks on you." His words, meant to calm her, felt like shards of glass in her already wounded heart. He was dismissing her, treating her like a hysterical hormonal woman. But what she saw was real. She knew it with every fiber of her being. As if drawn by an invisible string, Seraphina's laughter, loud and clear, drifted across the room. She tilted her head back, and the light from the chandeliers caught the sapphires, sending a shower of brilliant blue sparks dancing across the ceiling. In that moment, Elara felt a profound and terrifying certainty. Her perfect life was a lie, and the beautiful sparkling necklace that was supposed to be a symbol of her husband's love was now a glittering emblem of his betrayal. The gala, with its glittering facade of glamour and charity, had become the stage for the first act of Elara's personal tragedy. The curtain had just risen, and she was the unwilling star. The ride home was a study in suffocating silence. The city lights, once a source of comfort and wonder, now seemed to mock Elara with their cold, indifferent sparkle. Each passing street lamp illuminated the chasm that had opened up between her and Julian. He drove with a practiced ease, his handsome profile etched against the night, a mask of serene concern firmly in place. But Elara could feel the tension radiating from him, a low hum of something tightly coiled and carefully controlled. She, on the other hand, was a maelstrom of emotions. The initial shock had given way to a roiling sea of hurt anger and a terrifying, gut-wrenching doubt. The image of Seraphina Monroe bathed in the glow of her necklace was seared into her mind. The moment the penthouse door clicked shut behind them, Elara's carefully constructed composure shattered. "I want to see the necklace, Julian," she said, her voice steely, devoid of the tremor that had shaken it at the gala. Julian sighed a long, weary exhalation as if dealing with a petulant child. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Elara, we've been through this. It was a coincidence. A trick of the light." "I want to see it," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "Now." With a put-upon air of a man indulging his hormonal, irrational wife, he walked over to the large abstract painting that concealed their wall safe. He spun the dial, the soft clicks echoing the loud, frantic beating of Elara's heart. The heavy steel door swung open. He reached inside and pulled out the familiar velvet box. He presented it to her with a flourish, a magician revealing a perfectly executed trick. "See, safe and sound." Elara's hands trembled as she took the box. For a heart-stopping moment she hesitated. What if he was right? What if she had been mistaken? What if she opened the box and found her beautiful necklace nestled inside, and she had just created a storm in a teacup, all because of her overactive imagination? But the image of Seraphina's triumphant smile was too vivid, too real. With a deep breath she lifted the lid. There it was. The cascade of sapphires, the brilliant cut diamonds, the pear-shaped sapphire at its center. It was perfect. It was beautiful. And it felt utterly, completely wrong. She lifted it from its velvet bed. The metal felt cold against her skin, not with the familiar coolness of precious metal, but with a strange, almost artificial chill. The stones under the warm light of their apartment seemed to lack the depth, the fire of the ones she remembered. Julian's voice smooth as silk wrapped around her. "There, my love. Are you satisfied now? Can we please put this unpleasantness behind us and go to bed?" He reached for her, his arms intending to encircle her in a comforting embrace, but Elara flinched away as if his touch would burn her. "It's not the same," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Julian's face hardened, the charming facade cracking for a brief, terrifying moment. A flicker of something cold and ruthless flashed in his eyes before it was swiftly replaced by a look of profound hurt. "Not the same," he repeated, his voice laced with wounded disbelief. "Elara, I had this necklace custom made for you by one of the finest jewelers in the world. I poured my heart and soul into designing it, and now you're telling me it's not the same." He took a step back, his hand pressed to his chest, as if she had physically struck him. "I know you're pregnant, and your hormones are all over the place. But this is cruel. To accuse me of... What are you even accusing me of? That I had a replica made and gave the real one to some actress I don't even know." He laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. "It's ludicrous. It's insane. And frankly, it's insulting. The gaslighting was a masterclass in manipulation." He twisted her words, painted her as the villain, the ungrateful, hysterical wife. He used her pregnancy, the very thing that connected them, as a weapon against her. He made her question her own sanity, her own perception of reality. Doubt, insidious and venomous, began to creep back in. Was he right? Was she being irrational? The necklace in her hands looked so real. She was tired, emotional. Perhaps the stress of the pregnancy was making her paranoid. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of confusion, hurt, and exhaustion. Julian's expression softened instantly. He closed the distance between them and gently took the necklace from her hands, placing it back in its box. "Hey, hey!" He murmured, his voice now a gentle, loving caress. He pulled her into his arms, and this time she didn't resist. She was too tired to fight, too confused to trust her own judgment. She buried her face in his chest, his familiar scent a confusing mix of comfort and deceit. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, the words muffled against his shirt. "I don't know what's wrong with me." "Shh," he cooed, stroking her hair. "Nothing's wrong with you. You're just tired. We'll go to bed, and in the morning everything will be better. I love you, Elara. Only you. You and our baby boy. You are my world." His words were a potent cocktail of reassurance and poison. She wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe him. As he led her to their bedroom, she cast one last uncertain glance at the painting that hid the safe. The beautiful, vibrant artwork suddenly seemed to be mocking her, concealing a truth she was now too afraid to uncover. That night, as she lay in his arms feigning sleep, Elara knew one thing for certain. The woman who had gone to the gala secure and content in her perfect life was gone. In her place was a woman haunted by a terrible suspicion. A woman who was beginning to understand that the man she loved was a gifted artist, and his greatest masterpiece was the architecture of their life built on a foundation of expertly crafted lies. The days that followed were a torturous exercise in forced normalcy. Julian was a paragon of attentiveness, a walking, talking embodiment of the perfect husband. He brought her breakfast in bed, ran her lavender-scented baths, and spoke of their future with a renewed, almost fervent enthusiasm. He was building the walls of their perfect life, higher and higher, reinforcing them with every loving gesture, every tender word. But for Elara, the cracks were already showing. His perfection was now suspect, his charm, a carefully constructed mask. She found herself watching him, analyzing his every move, his every expression. She noticed the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at her now. She saw how he angled his phone away from her, the screen always tilted just out of her line of sight. He started taking more late-night business calls in his study, the door always firmly closed. Each instance was a small thing easily explained away. But together they formed a mosaic of deceit, a picture that was becoming clearer and more terrifying with each passing day. The doubt that had been planted at the gala was now a thorny vine wrapping itself around her heart, squeezing the life out of the love she had once felt for him. She felt utterly alone, trapped in her gilded cage with a man who was becoming a stranger. The baby, once a source of unadulterated joy, was now a source of a new, gnawing anxiety. She was bringing a child into a house built on lies. One particularly grueling afternoon, after Julian had left for a sudden, urgent business trip that had sprung up out of nowhere, Elara found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was pale, her eyes shadowed with sleepless nights and unshed tears. This wasn't her. She was not a victim. She was Elara Vance, a woman of strength and intellect, and she would not be gaslit into submission. With a newfound resolve, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Leo, it's Elara." Leo Maxwell was her oldest friend, a man she had met in the hallowed halls of Cambridge University. While she had pursued art history, he had been a prodigy in the burgeoning world of computer science and technology. They had been inseparable, a platonic pair who shared a bond forged in late-night study sessions, cheap pizza, and a shared sardonic sense of humor. Life had taken them in different directions, but the core of their friendship remained. Leo was now the head of a successful cybersecurity firm, a man who lived and breathed the digital world. He was also fiercely loyal, and the one person Elara knew she could trust implicitly. They met at a quiet, unassuming cafe in a part of the city Julian would never frequent. The moment Leo saw her, his usually cheerful face creased with concern. "Elle," he said, his voice soft. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I'm living with one." As the steam from their coffee cups curled into the air between them, Elara poured out her story. She told him everything. The gala, the necklace, the chillingly identical one Serafina Monroe had been wearing. She described Julian's expert gaslighting, the way he had twisted her reality and made her doubt her own sanity. She told him about the subtle changes in Julian's behavior, the secretive phone calls, the sudden business trips. Leo listened patiently, his gaze never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt, he didn't judge, he simply absorbed her story, his expression growing more grim with each detail. When she finally fell silent, her story hanging in the air between them, like a toxic cloud, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I believe you," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. The simple words were a balm to her wounded soul. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't hysterical. She was a woman who was being deceived. "He's a classic narcissist," Leo continued, his voice taking on the analytical tone of his profession. "The charm, the manipulation, the gaslighting, it's all textbook. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "I don't know," Elara confessed, her voice trembling. "I have no proof, just a gut feeling and a necklace that feels wrong." Leo leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming a thoughtful rhythm on the tabletop. "In my world, Elle, we don't rely on gut feelings. We rely on data. We need to get you that proof. We need to see what he's doing when he thinks no one is watching." A cold knot of dread formed in Elara's stomach. "What are you suggesting?" "Hidden cameras," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "In the apartment. In his study, the living room, maybe even the bedroom." Elara recoiled at the thought. It felt like a gross violation of privacy, a betrayal of the sanctity of their home. "Leo, I can't. That's spying on my own husband." "He's already betrayed you, Elara," Leo said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not violating his privacy. You're protecting yourself and your child. He's the one who brought the deceit into your home. You're just shining a light on it. Think of it as an insurance policy. If you're wrong, if he's innocent, then the cameras will show you that, and you can have peace of mind. But if you're right..." He let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken implications chilling Elara to the bone. She thought of the baby growing inside her, a tiny, innocent life completely dependent on her. She thought of Julian's cold eyes, the flicker of ruthlessness she had seen behind the mask of concern. She owed it to her child to know the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. She looked at Leo, her oldest, truest friend, and saw the unwavering support in his eyes. She took a deep, steadying breath. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now, laced with a steely determination. "Let's do it." The alliance was forged, a wounded heart and a watchful eye united in a quest for the truth. The game had changed. Elara was no longer just a pawn in Julian's carefully constructed world. She was now a player, and she was about to make her first move. The silent, unblinking eyes of the cameras would be her soldiers, and the truth her ultimate weapon. The installation was a clandestine operation executed with the precision of a military strike. Julian was away on another one of his overnight business trips, giving Elara and Leo a precious window of opportunity. Leo arrived at the penthouse with a discreet black bag, looking more like a visiting IT consultant than a co-conspirator in a domestic espionage plot. The cameras were marvels of modern technology, tiny, almost invisible lenses hidden in the most innocuous of objects. A sleek new digital clock for the bedroom, a minimalist smoke detector for the living room, and a high-end fountain pen for the pen holder on Julian's mahogany desk in his study. Leo worked with a quiet, focused efficiency, his fingers flying across wires and circuits. Elara watched him, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Every sound, every movement felt amplified in the silence of the apartment. She felt a profound sense of guilt, a feeling that she was desecrating her own home, her own marriage. But beneath the guilt was a stronger, more primal emotion, the desperate need to know. They're all connected to a secure, encrypted server. Leo explained, his voice a low murmur. You'll be able to access the live feed from your phone, your laptop, anywhere. It's completely untraceable. He'll never know. He showed her the app on her phone, a simple, discrete icon that looked like a generic utility app. With a tap, the screen split into 3 windows, each showing a live feed from one of the cameras. The view from the living room, the quiet intimacy of their bedroom, the imposing stillness of Julian's study. It was a God's eye view of her life, and it was utterly terrifying. The first few days after the cameras were installed were a slow, agonizing torture. Elara found herself glued to her phone, her thumb constantly hovering over the discrete app icon. She watched the live feeds with a morbid fascination, her heart pounding in her chest every time Julian entered one of the rooms. But there was nothing. She watched him work in his study, his brow furrowed in concentration as he spoke on the phone. The calls were about stocks, mergers, and acquisitions, the mundane language of his world. She watched him relax in the living room reading a book or watching a movie. She watched him sleep in their bed, his face peaceful and untroubled. With each passing day of normalcy, Elara's anxiety grew. Was she wrong? Had she made a terrible mistake? Had she allowed her suspicion to fester into a full-blown paranoia, leading her to betray the trust of an innocent man? The guilt gnawed at her, a relentless, corrosive force. She started to feel like the villain of her own story, the crazy, hormonal wife Julian had accused her of being. She called Leo in a panic, her voice a hushed whisper. "There's nothing, Leo. He's just being normal. I think I've made a terrible mistake." "Patience, El." Leo's voice was a steadying presence on the other end of the line. A predator doesn't hunt when it knows it's being watched. He's comfortable. He thinks he's won. He'll slip up. Just give it time. His words were a small comfort, but the waiting was excruciating. It was a slow burn, a torment of 1,000 tiny cuts. She had to pretend everything was fine to smile and kiss the man she was secretly spying on. She had to play the part of the loving, doting wife while inside she was a wreck of suspicion and self-doubt. The breakthrough came a week later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Elara had a prenatal appointment, a routine checkup that Julian usually insisted on attending. But that morning he had called, his voice full of regret, to say that a major deal had unexpectedly blown up and he was chained to his desk. He had been so apologetic, so seemingly disappointed, that a part of her had actually believed him. She left for her appointment, her heart heavy with a confusing mix of disappointment and a strange, unsettling premonition. In the waiting room of the doctor's office, surrounded by other expectant mothers, their faces glowing with happiness, Elara felt a sudden, irresistible urge. Her hands trembling, she pulled out her phone and tapped the discreet app icon. The 3 windows popped up on her screen. The living room was empty. The bedroom was empty. She switched to the feed from the study, and her world stopped. Julian was there, but he wasn't alone. Serafina Monroe, the raven-haired actress from the gala, was with him. She was perched on the edge of his desk, her crimson dress a slash of vibrant color against the dark wood. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a sound that Elara could not hear, but could vividly imagine. And then, as Elara watched her blood turning to ice in her veins, Julian leaned in and kissed her. It was not a hesitant, fleeting kiss. It was a deep, passionate kiss, a kiss of familiarity and shared secrets. Elara's phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the floor. A strangled gasp escaped her lips, drawing a concerned glance from the woman sitting next to her. But Elara didn't notice. She was in a world of her own, a world that had just been shattered into a million pieces. The unblinking eye of the camera had shown her the truth. It was not a slow burn anymore. It was a raging inferno, and it was consuming everything she had ever held dear. The guilt, the doubt, the confusion, it all vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Her husband was a liar. Her marriage was a sham. And the truth, she now realized with a chilling clarity, was far uglier, far more devastating than she could ever have imagined. The real show had just begun, and Elara was watching from the front row, a silent, heartbroken spectator to the demolition of her own life. Elara felt as though she was watching a movie of someone else's life, a silent black and white horror film where she was the unsuspecting victim. She retrieved her phone, her movements stiff and robotic, and forced herself to keep watching. The initial shock had given way to a chilling, almost out-of-body numbness. On the screen, Julian and Serafina broke their kiss. He murmured something to her, his hand caressing her cheek with an intimacy that made Elara's stomach churn. Then he stood up and walked towards the large abstract painting on the wall. Elara's breath hitched. The safe. He spun the dial with a practiced ease, the combination clearly etched into his memory. The heavy steel door swung open. He reached inside, his back to the camera, and when he turned around, Elara felt the last vestiges of her world crumble to dust. In his hands was not one but 2 velvet boxes. One was the familiar box he had shown her, the one that now sat in her jewelry case. The other was identical, a mirror image of the first. He walked back to Serafina and handed her one of the boxes. She opened it, and even on the small, grainy screen of her phone, Elara could see the brilliant sparkle of the sapphires and diamonds. It was the necklace, the real necklace. The one with the fire, the depth, the soul. Serafina's face lit up with a triumphant, possessive glee. She draped the necklace around her neck, admiring her reflection in the darkened window of the study. It was a perfect fit. It belonged to her. Then Julian spoke, and though the camera's microphone was not powerful enough to pick up his exact words, the context was brutally, devastatingly clear. He pointed to the second box, the one still in his hand, and then made a gesture that indicated it was a copy, a fake. He laughed, a silent, cruel laugh that made Elara's blood run cold. He had had a replica made. A cheap, soulless imitation that he had presented to his pregnant wife, while he had given the real, one-of-a-kind masterpiece, the symbol of their unique love, to his mistress. The gaslighting, the feigned hurt, the accusations of her being hormonal and irrational, it all came rushing back, each memory now coated in a thick, toxic layer of deceit. He hadn't just lied to her. He had orchestrated a cruel, elaborate deception designed to make her feel insane for suspecting the truth. The numbness that had enveloped Elara began to recede, replaced by a white-hot rage. A rage so pure and powerful it burned away her tears, her hurt, her fear. It was a primal protective rage, the fury of a woman betrayed of a mother whose child had been brought into a world of lies. She wanted to scream, to smash her phone against the wall, to storm back to the penthouse and confront them. But some small rational part of her mind, the part that had been honed by years of academic discipline and a sharp analytical intellect, held her back. Confrontation would be satisfying, yes, but it would be foolish. It would give him the upper hand, allow him to twist the narrative to paint her as the vengeful, hysterical wife. No, she needed more. She needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal. She needed to let him play out his hand to reveal the true depths of his depravity. Her prenatal appointment was a blur. She went through the motions, her smile a brittle mask, her voice a hollow echo of its former self. The doctor's reassurances about the baby's health, the strong, steady beat of his tiny heart, were the only things that kept her from completely shattering. This child, this innocent life, was her anchor in the storm. She would not let Julian's treachery destroy them both. That evening, when Julian returned home, he was the picture of the devoted husband, his face a mask of weary concern. He apologized profusely for missing her appointment, spinning a convincing tale of a corporate crisis averted at the last minute. He presented her with a bouquet of her favorite peonies, his eyes full of what she now knew was a manufactured sincerity. Elara played her part. She accepted his apology, his flowers, his kiss. She allowed him to rest his hand on her belly to speak to their unborn son in hushed, loving tones. But as she stood there, wrapped in the arms of the man who was systematically destroying her life, she felt a profound and terrifying disconnect. She was no longer a participant in this life. She was an observer, a spy in her own home. That night she lay in bed, feigning sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. When she was sure he was asleep, she slipped out of bed and went to the living room. She curled up on the sofa, her phone in her hand, and began to watch the recorded footage from the day. She fast-forwarded through the hours of nothingness, her finger hovering over the screen until she reached the moment Serafina had arrived. This time she was prepared. She watched the scene unfold again, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. But as she continued to watch, as she listened more closely to the fragments of conversation, the camera's microphone managed to pick up a new, more sinister layer of the betrayal began to emerge. They weren't just lovers reveling in a sordid affair. They were partners in a much larger, more calculated scheme. The inheritance is tied up in a trust. She heard Julian's voice, muffled but discernible. It's ironclad. I can't touch it unless you're the loving husband and father. Serafina's voice, clearer, sharper, finished his sentence. The picture of domestic bliss. And with the baby, it gives you leverage. It gives me control, Julian corrected her. Once I'm the sole trustee of his educational and future funds, it's a gateway. And my share? Serafina asked, her voice laced with a greedy impatience. You'll get what you're owed. Julian's voice was cold, pragmatic. Once we liquidate the assets, but we have to be patient. Another few months. After the baby is born, no one will question the devoted, grieving husband. Grieving husband. The words hit Elara with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just planning to steal her money. They were planning for a future without her. A future where Julian, the bereaved widower and single father, would have unfettered access to the vast fortune her parents had left her. The affair, the necklace, the gaslighting, it was all just a prelude, a smokescreen for a much darker, more diabolical plot. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated conspiracy. Her pregnancy, her baby, was not a symbol of their love, but a pawn in their twisted game. The rage that had sustained her now gave way to a chilling, terrifying fear. This man, this stranger she had married, was not just unfaithful. He was dangerous. and she was trapped in his web, a web of lies, deceit, and a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. The unblinking eye of the camera had not just unveiled an affair, it had exposed a monster, and Elara knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she had to escape before he and his accomplice decided that the grieving husband act needed to begin sooner rather than later. The fear was a living thing, a cold, coiling serpent in the pit of her stomach. For 2 days, Elara lived in a state of hypervigilance, every nerve-ending frayed, every shadow a potential threat. She moved through her life like a ghost, her interactions with Julian a masterpiece of forced calm. She smiled, she laughed, she played the part of the blissful mother-to-be, all the while her mind was racing, calculating, planning. The knowledge of their true plan had changed everything. This was no longer just about a broken heart and a shattered marriage. This was about survival. Her survival and the survival of her unborn child. The rage had not dissipated. It had simply transformed. It had cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a diamond-edged weapon of resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not be a pawn in their sick game. She would be the architect of their ruin. Her first call was to Leo. She met him not at a cafe, but at his office, a secure fortress of data and encryption. In a soundproof conference room, she played him the footage. She watched his face morph from concern to disbelief and then to a cold, hard fury that mirrored her own. "The bastards," he breathed, his eyes glued to the screen. This is beyond an affair. This is criminal conspiracy." "I know," Elara said, her voice steady, devoid of the tears she had shed just days before. "And I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg. I need more than just this footage, Leo. I need something concrete, something that will not just expose them, but destroy them." "What do you have in mind?" he asked, his gaze sharp, analytical. "I remember Julian mentioning a new family trust he wants me to sign. He said it's to protect our son's future. He's been pushing for it. I think that's his endgame. That's the document that will give him control." "And you think Serafina is more than just a greedy mistress?" "I'm sure of it." Elara said, her intuition, which she now trusted, implicitly screaming at her. "The way they talk. It's like a business transaction. They're partners. I want to know everything about her. Where she came from, who she knows, where her money comes from. I want to know her weaknesses." Leo nodded, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. "Leave it to me. I'll do a deep dive. Financial records, social connections, digital footprint. If she has a skeleton in her closet, I'll find it." While Leo delved into the digital underworld, Elara made her next move. She needed more than just digital evidence. She needed a professional, someone who could navigate the murky waters of the legal and criminal world. She needed someone who could dig into Julian's and Serafina's lives in a way that Leo, for all his technical prowess, could not. She found him through a discreet referral from her family's old lawyer. His name was Marcus Thorne, a former detective turned private investigator. He was a man in his late 50s, with a weary, cynical face that had seen too much of the darker side of human nature. He was also, she was told, the best in the business. Elara met him in a sterile, impersonal law office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and unspoken secrets. She didn't show him the video. Instead, she laid out the facts as she knew them, her voice calm and measured. She told him about her husband's suspicious behavior, the actress, the necklace, and her fears about her inheritance. She presented it as a case of potential financial fraud, a husband trying to swindle his wealthy wife. Thorne listened without interruption, his gaze shrewd and appraising. He took a few notes in a small leather-bound notebook, his pen scratching against the paper, the only sound in the room. When she had finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're scared, Mrs. Croft," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "But you're not hysterical. Your instincts are telling you something is wrong. In my experience, a woman's instincts are usually right." He paused, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. And in this case, I think you're right to be scared. This has all the hallmarks of a professional con. The word professional sent a fresh chill down Elara's spine. This confirmed her deepest fears. This wasn't just Julian's greed. This was a practiced, well-rehearsed scheme. I want you to find out everything you can about my husband Julian Croft and an actress named Seraphina Monroe. Elara said, her voice gaining a new strength. I want to know their financial histories, their associations, their pasts. I want to know if they've done this before. Surveillance background checks, financial forensics. It will be expensive, Thorne warned her. Money is no object, Elara replied, her voice cold as steel. The truth is all that matters. Thorne nodded, a flicker of respect in his tired eyes. He handed her a contract. I'll start immediately. The next few days were a blur of clandestine activity. Elara became the commander of a secret war, a war being fought on two fronts. Leo was her digital general, mining data, cracking passwords, and tracing digital footprints. Thorne was her field marshal, his team of operatives conducting surveillance, digging through public records, and interviewing sources. And Elara, from the gilded cage of her penthouse, was the strategist. She continued to play the part of the oblivious wife, all the while gathering her own intelligence. She paid closer attention to Julian's conversations. She noted the names he mentioned, the companies he dealt with. Every piece of information, no matter how small, was relayed to Leo and Thorne. She was building a case, a fortress of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. The fear was still there, a constant low-level hum beneath the surface. But now, it was overshadowed by a new, all-consuming purpose: revenge. She was no longer just protecting herself. She was fighting back. She was not just a victim. She was the architect of their downfall. And she was meticulously, patiently drawing up the blueprints for their destruction. The final act was approaching, and Elara was determined that when the curtain fell, she would be the one left standing. The flood of information came in waves, each one more shocking than the last. Leo, with his unparalleled access to the digital realm, struck first. He had managed to bypass the security on Seraphina's cloud storage, a feat of technical wizardry he explained in terms Elara barely understood. What she did understand with a chilling clarity were the contents of that storage. It was a treasure trove of deceit. Seraphina was far more than just an aspiring actress and a greedy mistress. She was a meticulous con artist, and this was not her first rodeo. Leo uncovered files on at least 3 other wealthy men, each one a target in a similar scheme. There were dossiers complete with financial statements, personal habits, and psychological profiles. There were scripts, detailed plans for chance encounters, manufactured dramas, and tearful confessions of love. But the most damning evidence was a series of encrypted chat logs between Seraphina and an unknown contact codenamed Puppet Master. The conversations were cold, clinical, and utterly ruthless. They discussed targets, percentages, and escape routes. They spoke of Julian not as a partner, but as a high-level asset, a man with the charm and financial acumen to execute the most ambitious phase of their plans. He's not her partner, Elle. Leo's voice was grim over the phone. He's her pawn. A very well-placed, very valuable pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. This puppet master is the one pulling the strings. The revelation sent a new wave of shock through Elara. Julian, the man she had believed to be a master manipulator, was himself being manipulated. It didn't absolve him of his crimes, but it added a new twisted layer to the betrayal. He had been so blinded by his own greed and arrogance that he couldn't see he was just a tool in someone else's much larger game. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne and his team were unearthing the real-world corroboration for Leo's digital discoveries. They found that Seraphina Monroe was a ghost. Her name, her backstory, her entire identity was a fabrication. Her real name was Anya Petrova, a woman with a string of aliases and a history of petty fraud charges in Eastern Europe. She had entered the country on a fake passport and had systematically built her new identity using her beauty and cunning to infiltrate the world of the wealthy elite. Thorne's team also dug into Julian's finances. They discovered a series of offshore accounts, a complex web of shell corporations designed to launder money. And they found the transaction records for the replica necklace. It had been purchased from a notorious forger in the city's underbelly, a man known for creating high-quality fakes for the criminal elite. The payment had been made in cash, but the forger, when persuaded by one of Thorne's more intimidating operatives, was more than willing to provide a detailed description of Julian. The final devastating piece of the puzzle came from Thorne himself. He had placed Julian under 24/7 surveillance, and his operatives had tailed him to a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit underground parking garage. His meeting was not with Serafina. It was with a man Thorne's team had identified as Dmitry Volkov, a known enforcer for a shadowy, international crime syndicate. The Puppet Master. The surveillance photos were grainy, but the story they told was clear. Julian, the titan of finance, the master of his universe, looked small and nervous in the presence of the imposing Volkov. He handed over a briefcase, his movements jerky and subservient. Volkov's syndicate specializes in high-value asset stripping, Thorne explained to Elara, his voice grave. They find wealthy, vulnerable targets, and they use people like Serafina or Anya to get on the inside. They drain the assets, and then they disappear. Julian wasn't just planning to steal your inheritance. He was feeding it to a pack of wolves. The full horrifying picture was now complete. This was not a simple affair, not a straightforward con. This was a sophisticated international criminal operation. And she, Elara, was their biggest target yet. The baby, her precious unborn son, was the key to unlocking her fortune. The weight of this knowledge was immense, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate her. But with the fear came a strange, liberating clarity. She now knew the full extent of the enemy's forces. She had their names, their methods, their weaknesses. She had the evidence, the video footage, the chat logs, the financial records, the surveillance photos. She had an arsenal. And she had a plan. The final piece of her counteroffensive was put into place. Julian had been pressuring her to sign the papers for the new family trust. He had arranged a lavish dinner party at their penthouse, a celebration of their future, where the signing would be the main event. He had invited their closest friends, their family, and his most important business associates. He wanted an audience for his performance as the perfect husband and father. Elara agreed to the party. She agreed to everything. She was the perfect, compliant wife ready to sign her future away. She feigned excitement, discussing the menu with the caterer, selecting the flowers. All the while, a cold, calculated fury simmered beneath the surface. The stage was set. The players were all in place. Julian believed he was the director of this grand production, the master of ceremonies for his own triumph. He had no idea that the script had been rewritten. The final act was about to begin, and it would not be a celebration of his success, but a public execution of his character. Elara, the woman he had underestimated, the pawn he thought he could control, was about to checkmate the king. The unblinking eye of the camera had started this journey, but it would be her own eyes, clear and unwavering, that would witness his downfall. The night of the dinner party arrived, cloaking the city in a blanket of velvet and stars. The penthouse, which had become a stage for so much pain and deception, was now dressed for its final act. The air hummed with the soft melody of a string quartet, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the low murmur of polite, affluent conversation. Elara moved through the room like a queen in her court. She was breathtaking in a gown of midnight blue silk that draped elegantly over her pregnant form, her face a serene, luminous mask. She greeted her guests with a warm, genuine smile, a smile that held a secret, terrible power. She saw the looks of admiration, the whispers of envy. They saw a woman who had it all. They had no idea she was about to burn it all to the ground. Julian was in his element, the consummate host. He was a whirlwind of charm and charisma, his arm possessively around Elara's waist, his hand frequently resting on her belly. He was playing his part to perfection, the proud husband and father-to-be, on the cusp of securing his family's future. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his own brilliance that he was completely blind to the abyss that was about to open up beneath his feet. After the main course, Julian tapped his glass with a spoon, the clear, ringing sound silencing the room. He stood, his face beaming with a triumphant smile. "My dear friends, my family," he began, his voice resonant with emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight to share in our joy. As you know, Elara and I are about to embark on the most wonderful adventure of our lives, parenthood." He paused, his gaze resting on Elara with a look of such profound manufactured love that it made her stomach turn. "To ensure the future of our son, to protect him and provide for him in the way he deserves, Elara and I have decided to create a new family trust. Tonight, in front of all of you, the people who matter most to us, we will sign the documents that will secure his legacy." He gestured to a small table where his lawyer, a man with a perpetually nervous expression, had laid out a thick stack of papers and a gleaming fountain pen. It was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of his grand plan. "Elara, my love," he said, extending his hand to her. "Shall we?" Elara stood, her movements graceful and deliberate. She walked not towards the signing table, but towards the large state-of-the-art television screen that dominated one wall of the living room. In her hand, she held a small remote control. "Actually, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing through the silent room, "before we sign anything, there's a short film I'd like to share with everyone. It's a story about love, betrayal, and the surprising things you can learn about a person when you're not in the room." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Julian's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Elara, what are you doing? This isn't the time for games." "Oh, but it is, my love," she replied, her voice laced with an icy calm. "The games are just beginning." And with the press of a button, the screen flickered to life. The first image was the view from the camera in Julian's study, and there he was, locked in a passionate embrace with Seraphina Monroe. A collective gasp went through the room. Julian's face went white, his confident facade crumbling in an instant. The video continued, a curated highlights reel of his depravity. The conversation about the replica necklace, the laughter as he handed the real one to his mistress, the cold clinical discussion of Elara's inheritance, the chilling mention of the grieving husband. With each new scene, the atmosphere in the room grew colder, more toxic. The guests, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and morbid fascination, turned to stare at Julian, who stood frozen, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. Elara let the footage play, her gaze never leaving her husband's face. She watched the arrogance drain out of him, replaced by a raw, primal panic. He was a cornered animal, exposed and helpless. But Elara wasn't finished. The scene on the screen shifted. It was now the grainy surveillance photo from the underground parking garage. Julian, looking small and pathetic, handing a briefcase to the imposing figure of Dmitry Volkov. For those of you who don't recognize the man on the right, Elara's voice cut through the stunned silence. His name is Dmitry Volkov. He's a key figure in an international crime syndicate that specializes in defrauding people like me. And my husband Julian was not his partner. He was his errand boy. The story of Elara is a harrowing reminder that the most devastating betrayals often come from those we trust the most. It's a testament to the strength of a woman who, in her most vulnerable moments, refused to be a victim. She fought back not with hysteria, but with intelligence, courage, and an unyielding will to protect her child and reclaim her life. Her journey from a shattered dream to a triumphant new beginning shows us that even in the face of the most calculated deceit, the truth is a powerful weapon, and the human spirit is remarkably resilient. If Elara's story of strength and survival resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might find inspiration in her journey. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of drama, resilience, and the unshakable power of the truth. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.